Just another quick tidbit. I don't need security because Graham Jordanson and I are from the same hometown. I don't know if you knew that. And his name is still written on a lot of walls in Fort Dodge. I was back there a couple months ago, and it's still in some of the places he used to frequent. So let's talk about it. OPPD's vision, leading the way we power the future. Mission is provide affordable, reliable, environmentally sensitive energy services to our customers. Our core values are really around, we have a passion to serve, we honor our community, and we care for each other. And these are really kind of vision, mission, value statements that really coalesce kind of the focus that we have at OPPD, and certainly within the OPPD family. Thought I'd start out this way because it's always good to kind of just set some context about where we've been and what we're doing. So back in 2010, about 5% of our retail sales came from renewable resources, primarily wind resources. Over the course of time, we began to really kind of build that up, really began to make moves in 14, 15, 16. Obviously, we're waiting for our Shoals site to come on the grid, and that'll be in 2019. And that'll bring about 40% of our retail sales from renewable energy resources, primarily wind, some landfill gas, and some hydro that we participate in with the Western Area Power Association. So anyway, that trend is continuing. I'll talk a little bit about our strategic directive number 7 and kind of the conversation went on at the board last month at the end, and then obviously we'll have an opportunity to open it up. All of our renewable resources are within the state of Nebraska. I'm not sure if you can see these, you know, if you're a good Catholic guy, these look like steeples and crosses, but these are where our wind farms scattered throughout the eastern part of Nebraska. This wind farm down here actually is 2 pieces. There's a piece in Kansas that I believe Westar Energy has out of Kansas, and we have the northern part on the Nebraska side, but they're integrated together. And so there's some efficiencies by us putting together like a 100 megawatt wind farm, and I think we take 40 or 60 out of that. Anyway, we take half of that, and they take about the other half. And then obviously we're scattered up in this neck of the woods, up in northeast and north central Nebraska, northeast Nebraska. Our community solar initiative, we've talked about that over the course of the last year. That's in process. So we'll be in our partnership with NextEra Energy. We will actually be constructing that this spring. And so we're kind of working on the final kind of promotional and work that you'll see more of that coming up in 2019. It's kind of our, we have some solar that is on our Elkhorn Center facility, probably newer solar on our Omaha Center facility up by the airport. This will be kind of our new addition to the solar. It'll be 5 megawatts. It's on about a 70-acre site. It'll take up about 35 acres. It's tied very closely to a substation. If you're going into the city of Fort Calhoun or the town of Fort Calhoun, there's that big manufacturer that used to be there. It's just to the north of that and then to the east, and it'll be back in that neck of the woods. And so it's on a nice flat area, believe it or not. You would think it kind of would be on hilly, but it's a nice flat area. It's a great site. Has an opportunity to kind of double that capacity in the event that we need it. So anyway, the Solar Shares program marketing will be rolled out in 2019. You'll be hearing more about that as we kick off 2019. This chart is up here for just a conversation around timing. I think if David beats me up ever, David Corbin or Ken Winston or Graham, it's at quicker, sooner, faster. But there's a reason why we don't lead in some of the new technology right away. And so this is the example. So I'm going to give you kind of wind cost back in 2009. Wind cost in 2009 were in that $50 to $60 a megawatt. There were some projects that high. We actually had early projects that were in that zone as well. But look what happens just 8 years later in 2017. And this price is even lower than the 2017 number that I put up a year ago at the Nebraska Wind and Solar Conference. So it's very competitive. Now we've added probably 122, 300, about 400 or 500 megawatts over the last couple of years because of that price and because of our decision to shut down Fort Calhoun Nuclear Station. If you take a look, excuse me, this is the wind. If you look at solar cost, if you look at where they were in 2009 versus where they were, and this would be utility grade, these were projects that we went out for either RFIs or RFPs. So these are solid projects that we got from manufacturers or from vendors or from developers. It was up in the $350 a megawatt hour. We saw it in 2017 come down to this about $70 a megawatt hour, and the most recent pricing that we're seeing is significantly lower than that. And some of the strategies that we are looking at in solar is by oversizing the solar panels, undersizing the diverters or the inverters. We actually get a broader shoulder on that solar that fits more closely with our peak. So you may see in the near future some other conversations about utility grade solar, but that price is continually coming down. But if we would have went early in the process, the cost would be significantly high. And in these PPAs, they're no different than really us owning and putting steel in the ground. So it's an opportunity for us to take advantage of low cost when it's low cost, and we can then really kind of pull the trigger, so to speak, on those low cost generation. And that's why you've seen some of the increase in some of the wind over the last 2 or 3 years. PPA is called Purchase Power Agreement. So what we would do in the example of the community solar I just talked about with NextEra, we actually buy the energy output from them through a purchase power agreement for a period of time at a price. It may or may not have an escalator. It may or may not have some other components to it, but that's typically what that may look like. So we're seeing some of these trends develop. Someone asked me in the back about battery storage. Where are you guys at on battery storage? And we have spent 2017 through about the first part of 18, we spent some time on a variety of new technologies. Certainly we saw some of the solar things begin to surface, but we're also seeing battery storage becoming far more competitive today than they were in 2009 and 2017. You're seeing more projects come from pilot projects, these kind of one-off projects, to more utility-grade, system-wide benefits and values. And so we're spending a lot of time understanding where that technology is and how it may match up with some of these other technologies in the long run. So that's another example. We really want to wait for the right time where that creates a lot of value, because this energy that we have, that we get, we essentially bid in the market. And so if I have to bid this price in at $350 a megawatt into a $22 market, that's a loss I take on every single megawatt. So I'm very sensitive about the pricing I get from that energy, because I still have to sell it in the market. That's what happens in a regional transmission organization. All my energy I bid into the market. They tell me what I should operate, typically renewables. In this example, landfill, the WAPO related work are the first in the market, right? So we don't regulate these power outlets either on wind or solar or other renewables. It's the other generation that gets moderated in the market. So that's why we're paying very close attention to these prices, and we'll strike when we believe it's competitive for the long term. It's not that, I won't say who said this, that we're ignorant to that technology or ignorant to executing new ways of doing things. There's a time to do it where it's cost effective and you get the greatest value and benefit. And that's what we're trying to look at, short term and long term for that matter. We're considering, was there one that didn't show up in here? No. Okay, we'll see, maybe in this next one. So here are the things that we're looking at from a technology. We spent 2017, about half of 18, focused in on a variety of non-traditional solutions. These are solutions that we may put on a transmission system. Transmission is high voltage, so it would be the 150 foot to 180 foot poles. You'll see a lot of steel, a lot of wire, very tall. versus traditional distribution that may be more wood poles, more in the neighborhood. You'll see these very tall around certain right-of-ways, certainly down on Pacific Street, certainly down on 72nd Street. These typically connect into substations. But we looked at a variety of different technologies that may tie into our transmission or distribution system. We did look at energy storage. Energy storage from a point where rather than us building out a substation, which we believe would have additional load, in the interim, we may put in battery storage to take care of that 2 to 3 hours of peak that we may get off that substation during the summer. So we're evaluating multiple projects around that and whether or not those projects will fit into a solution around energy storage at the substation level. Then the broader piece is, how does this enter into large utility grade generation? And that could be next to a solar facility, could be at the substation, could be near a wind facility. How do you begin to store that energy and then use it during a time in which you need it? And this isn't new to the industry. So on WAPA, as an example, the Western Area Power Association, there are times during the summer that they may pump water back up at night and let it run down through the dam generation. Not the dam, bleep that on this one, would you please? On the dam system generation, right? So they, at the low cost at night, it's low cost energy. We have a lot of wind at night, low cost energy where they pump it up and then they run it back down during peak times to impact the peak energy that they need off that system. So it's not necessarily new, but this is where we're watching that price. We're watching how they're integrating them. We're watching how these microgrids are developed, and we're paying a lot of attention to the research that's going on there. Microgrids are very similar to that. It's how people and businesses and campuses can be self-sustaining. And so we're actually working with some of our customers around some of those activities as well. Certainly in energy efficiency products and demand response, we have a variety of things we do around demand response, around energy efficiency. It could be for low-income energy efficiency, for other energy efficiency credits, for increased efficiency in air conditioners. We do some prescriptive work for industry. We do a lot of lighting rebates for industry as well. Heather is here, Heather Sipkin is here, and she's kind of our energy efficiency queen. She can answer any questions. Matter of fact, I'll just get them over her right away so she can answer them correctly. She knows all the programs that we offer, and we've been pretty effective. If you go back to 2014, we had a commitment that we would reduce peak demand by 300 megawatts by 2023. And we're about halfway through that as well. And we're just going through another assessment of some of that demand side management and energy efficiency work that we're doing. We're actually looking at small generators. So this would be maybe in placement of a battery storage at substations where we would have small generators that we may operate at a substation just to gauge load growth. Rather than building out and spending money on substation, we could use small generation to essentially take care of some 2 or 3 hours of peak load until we know that load is on our system, and then we can build out that substation. It just defers some of that capital investment so we can use that capital in other ways. And then on the solar PV, that could be on the distribution system, that could be within our system, that could be utility grade system. And so our teams have spent quite a bit of time reviewing that, and obviously out of that came some of our work around community solar and some of the work that we did with NextEra Energy on our community solar project up at Fort Calhoun. And as you saw on some of that price curve, we're seeing those prices and the manner in which they use that solar, so we get greater benefit in capacity. And that's a value in the market, not just the energy, but it's how do I cover that energy during peak times during the day. So what do you think by the hour of the day is our peak time during the day? Noon, 6, 2, 4. Typically our peak is between 4 and 7 in the evening. Right? 4 and 7 in the evening. And so that is part of the challenge where you see typically solar drop off in that late part of the afternoon. And so we're looking at technologies and ways which we can optimize those systems to kind of broaden those shoulders to get more capacity value out of those solar institutions. And companies that are doing it, we're seeing some of the value of what that may look like. This is an example of one of the customers. So we talked about that by 2019, about 40% of our retail sales will come from renewable resources. This is a Facebook project out in Sarpy County on Highway 50. This project, this company is building their own wind farm that will cover all of their megawatt hours that they use over the course of the year, right? So pretty significant, and it's because of the rate that our board approved that we spent time with these customers where they wanted the flexibility to be able to build their own energy or buy their own renewable energy to essentially supply or at least cover their load. We're going through that process. We still cover the capacity for those customers, and they pay us for that capacity. And whether we buy it or whether we build it is a decision that goes into the conversation with that customer. But we're seeing more and more customers that kind of want to bring their own renewable energy with them, right? And so we're enabling that by allowing the rate that we call 261M to occur and doing something very similar. And we have several large projects that we're working on besides this project in Sarpy County. We're partnering with UNMC on the state's largest rooftop solar unit. So this is work where we're going to take multiple buildings at UNMC. It's part of their commitment to sustainability. It's part of their commitment to really recruit some top-notch researchers that really believe in sustainability from where they may come from throughout the United States, and it's just a great partnership that we have. I will tell you on some of the demand-side management and energy efficiency projects that we've done with UNMC, they've been able to reduce their demand by about 20%. And also their kilowatt hour usage by 20%, even though they significantly increased their footprint by multiple buildings. So they're great stewards of our state dollars by the way that they manage energy. I know we had several colleges represented saying, hey, you know, you should be doing more, and we've offered many of these institutions the opportunity to reduce their demand and reduce energy efficiency. UNMC is really the one that has taken us up on that. So they're doing some great work, and we have a great partnership with them. We're working that project with them where we're part of the construction team that's actually installing that, and that's going very well.
How big is that?
It's in the 463 kilowatt hours, I believe, over 3 buildings.
1,400 panels.
Yeah, something like that.
That have now been installed.
Yeah, there's a great wire story on OPPD The Wire that talks about this project with them. Obviously, we're working with some other customers who have similar interests around this kind of a behind their meter kind of solution, and we'll work with them on that. That came out of the work that we did in 2017 about non-traditional solutions, is to work closely with our customers that if they want solutions around sustainability, renewable energy, that we would essentially help facilitate that with them. So very proactive and positive with some of the work that we're doing with them. Our electric vehicle pilot charge-up program kind of kicked off. This sold out on the rebates and the partnership that we had with the Nebraska Environmental Trust. I think you can still get rebates from the manufacturer, Nissan. I think we're getting close to with another manufacturer. Has that actually been announced yet? Yeah. With Audi, yeah. So there's some great opportunities. We do a $500 charging rebate on their home charger. Eric, did you get your rebate yet?
Not yet.
Not yet. It's in process. Okay, very good.
Send you a serial number.
What's that?
I'm still working on sending some data back.
Okay. I thought you said I'm just making my own serial number, and I'm going, okay. I don't think that's what it means, but no, that's fine. So anyway, so that's just a great example of how we're thinking about promoting electric vehicles, and I think this is interesting. and this is something that we're paying a lot of attention to, specifically around electric vehicles. But for the first time since 1979, and this is through www.vox.com, for the first time since 1979, American cars, trucks, airplanes emit more carbon dioxide than power plants do. So obviously you see where these are beginning to cross. This lower line is the kind of increase in automotive, and the electric power is actually going down. And as we talked about in our board meeting last week, I mean, there is a plan for units 4 and 5 at North Omaha. We have essentially shut down units 1, 2, and 3 on coal. We've converted them to natural gas. They had capability to be burned on natural gas, but I believe the first year we shut them down, that summer we used them for peaking, just during the summer. We don't use them for really any time, and I don't think in 18 we use them at all. Russ? I'm giving him a quiz now. But I don't believe we have. But they're there for the capacity value that we need to have in the market, that we're required to have by being part of the Southwest Power Pool Regional Transmission Organization. So we believe there's going to be an uptick in driving the increase in the use of electric vehicles. And so that's going to be pretty important for us to begin to think about that. I know the Nebraska Power Association has a committee that's looking at that across the state of Nebraska, but we're also looking at that very clearly about our service footprint from the Kansas border up north of Blair over to Lincoln, and what that may look like for the OPPD customers and how we might be able to do that. So that'll continue. We'll continue to look for ways in which we can kind of encourage electric vehicles, and so our teams are continually looking at other opportunities as well. We're converting and made a commitment to convert all of our LED streetlights. And so we have about 80,000 streetlights throughout our service territory. And so we're in a 5-year process that we would convert those from either high pressure sodium mercury vapor to LEDs. There'll be significant savings to the municipalities and to the governments and to the counties and to the SIDs. This is another example where we'll see a reduction by a cost by about 25%, and will reduce energy use by about 50%. Now that's off-peak energy use typically, unless you get one of those that are stuck during the day. But this is really important because it also follows that technology curve. I know when 2009, I think we were working with Re-Energize, and Eric at that time said, you guys ought to be converting all of our street lights at the city to LEDs. But the cost of that LED light was about $400. Now 9 years later, it's about $100. So you want to make sure you get on the right curve and the right side of that technology curve. And those are important. So we're going to see some value. This really doesn't negatively impact us at all. And it gives us the opportunity to think about how we utilize folks because they'll be increased. We'll actually be doing less maintenance because they have a much longer life. Typically, high pressure sodium have a 5-year life. LEDs have a much longer life, so they'll be reduced in maintenance costs. And I'll do questions at the end, if that's okay. So, what are OPPD's environmental stewardship goals? I'm going to talk about some of the things that we're doing. This is one where I believe through either the Nebraska Wildlife Federation and through the Save the Monarch organization, they asked us to consider whether or not we would begin to plant certain plants, milkweeds and others to support the monarch migration. This is just an example where I think it's over 250 or 260 acres that we've worked with those organizations to plant. Our employees were part of the planning process as well to put those prairies kind of back in progress, so to speak. An example of some of the things that we're doing around our commitments to stewardship. This is another one that I think is kind of important. I know there's conversations about, well, specifically at our last month's board meeting about OPPD is the largest emitter in the city of Omaha and Douglas County, and the answer is that's absolutely correct. But we have a plant that's 25 times bigger than any other manufacturer in Douglas County. But there are some important things that go on at these facilities that we have. We've decreased sulfur dioxide by 11%, reduced nitrous oxide by 4.5% just over the last year or so, decreased carbon dioxide by 4.9%. Nebraska City 2 station has achieved the low emitter status, which were significantly below any of the requirements of the EPA and at the state level as well. Nebraska City is getting very close to that. We've completed 11 successful quarters, and we need 12 to complete that. These are the regulatory requirements that we have to be under, and you can see where we're significantly under them in many different ways. And so we continually focus in on how we can be the best users of our current technology as some of that transformation to newer technologies kind of continue down our strategy. This is an example of mercury. So some things you typically wouldn't see or hear, I thought I would add in. I think it's kind of important. If this line is 2013, you're seeing a significant number of reductions in mercury in our North Omaha station we use as an example. Certainly well below the emitter status that we're required by the law and regulation. We take great pride in that. And some of these things we do certainly voluntary to increase the reduction of these emissions in our facilities. So we're really proud of some of the work that we're doing there as we kind of move through this transformation. My guess is I have seen a letter from every single one of you in one way or another over the last 2 months or so would be my guess. So, and it's really around this strategic directive number 7. How the board ended up at the end of the board meeting last month is that we have a long-term goal to at least 50% of retail sales supplied by renewable sources, and that we're going to look at a reduction of 20% in our carbon intensity from 2020 to 2030. And so that is how the board ended that kind of conversation after several months of thinking of that. But I had someone ask me just the other day, and they said, well, are you afraid of 100% renewable? And I said, no, I don't think anybody on my management team or myself is afraid at 100%. We're not afraid of what it may be on no fossil fuels somewhere in the future. We want to understand the implications of that, right? And so I'll share with you, and I'll be sharing with our board, we're going to spend some time as a management team looking at what are those implications to get there? What does it look like? What would need to be done? How would we go about doing that? And I think that's really important to understand that, because most of the major decisions that we make, even in the strategic directives, are based on some analysis of what the implications are to get to that objective. And so we're very serious about that. And so I think what you'll see from us over the next year or so is what does that look like and what are those implications, so not only our board, but certainly the public understand the implications of what that is. Positive, negative, indeterminate, whatever it may be. Don't know the answer to that, but that's why we want to go through that deep analysis and what that may look like. So you may see more about that coming up in the near future. And this was really kind of the basis of what we've talked about. This was really, this would be the reduction that we would want to look at, the 20% reduction goal. This takes into consideration the reduction of units 4 and 5 at North Omaha that will fuel switch. And whether we fuel switch them to gas or we look at abandoning them, then that decision will be made as we get closer to that date. So there's some work that we need to do around this, whatever that may look like. And this was really identified as part of the Clean Power Plan level that then got mixed up in politics and regulation and all that other stuff. But we thought this was really a good vehicle to start with, and then look and see how we can kind of incrementalize that over time once we meet these targets that we've identified. So that's my quick 20 minutes, David. And David says I can only, when I answer questions, I got to do it in 3 minutes or less. Is that right?
Except that he doesn't get to ask questions.
Yeah, I don't get to ask him. I don't get to ask. Can't ask questions.
I just want to set the ground rules here for the Q&A. First of all, because I was trying to run around and make sure we could stay in the building, I neglected to say that this was co-sponsored by Nebraskans for Solar and Green Bellevue. And so I want to thank them. I want to, anybody who's on the executive committee, please raise your hand so people know that you're here. Of the either organization, actually, of any of the organizations. Thank you. And here's the way we're going to do it. Since we're videotaping it, you can ask a question. We're going to have to repeat the question so that it will be on camera and so that other people can see it. So make sure that the questions are concise and not speeches, so that we can get as many questions in as possible, and I'll kind of moderate the questions. So I'm not going to take the microphone back because this microphone is for here, and we need the microphone for the camera. So that's why we need to repeat the questions.
And David, if there's an opportunity afterwards when the meeting's done, I'll commit. I'll stay around for as long as you need me to stay around. So. Remember, I got a 5-year-old and a 2.5-year-old at home. So.
And I did ask our legal counsel to I didn't introduce him, but there he is, Jim Kavanaugh.
Wait, the first question comes from the legal counsel? I do have stories on Jim Kavanaugh, so I don't have a problem sharing them on video. So
he gets
James.
to ask the first question.
Full disclosure, Tim and I go back. We worked together in the private sector at an energy company.
Yeah, right.
30 years ago. And so, yeah, he has stories on me, but I have stories on him.
You do.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think this is great. Having the Oppd CEO and staff here, we appreciate it. I know we've got directors here and member directors that serve on your board. And we're really, kind of all in this together. So when I'm going to be talking about this transition, which we're making, the whole world's making, from fossil fuel generation to renewable generation, it's encouraging. The goal is 100%. And we understand the goals that they've been set and the strategic .7 that you put out there. We've all read that. And that's a great place. How do we get to 100%? Because we got to get there as quick as possible.
So this is a really interesting question.
How do we get to 100%?
How do we get to 100% energy? Sorry, I have to repeat the
Jim
question.
didn't hear the part about don't give any speeches.
Yeah. I certainly expected that. So, well, here's, I would say, just a couple things around that. So, it is interesting on what 100% is, right? So when you ask other people, what does 100% renewable mean? So we could get 100% renewable and not change anything on our fossil fuel side. Is that what you want?
No.
No, that's not a question.
Of the electricity comes
This
from
is
renewables. 100% of the
I know that, but Jim, this is part of the issue that's going on in the industry.
I understand.
When people say 100%, they say 100%, but that's not how it gets rolled out. And so we just want the clarity on what it is and what it isn't. Because what I get questioned is that, hey, you have some neighboring utilities that have committed to 100%, but they're not closing down any additional coal plants or natural gas fired plants. And so what is that, right? Is it non-fossil fuel in the future? Don't know, maybe that's it. And how do those line up over the course of time? And what are the implications? And I think that's the conversation that our senior team spent 2 days on Monday and Tuesday crafting. What the concept may look like, and we're going to spend a couple days in January, come to our board in February and say, hey, here are our thoughts around this. And just not around that, but around kind of the automation and the digitalization of our distribution system, and what are those implications around all of those pieces. So what we want to do is just get clarity on what that means, because it means different things to different people. So, David had a wonderful editorial in the World Herald talking about 90 counties or 70 counties or whatever it is. But you go and talk to them, it's not 100% renewal and that's all they get, right? Because the renewable doesn't come in their load pattern. So it's either being covered by the utility that serves them on the wholesale side, or it's being covered by some other way. And so that's what we're trying to get to. What are the implications about getting to 100% renewable? We get it. We get what people, I think you were very clear, by the way, in what you would like. What we're trying to do is, what are the implications to get there? And what could that timing look like and what could it be? that's where,
Okay.
that's our conversation, but
When do you think we will get there? Just spitballing.
no, I'm not gonna spitball.
In our lifetime?
Yeah,
Your lifetime?
in my lifetime, I'm hoping, I have good Irish blood as you do, so we live long and get crotchety as we get older. So my guess is it will be in my lifetime, yeah, for sure. I believe that, I really do. So.
Okay, 1, 2, 3.
You mentioned helping industry get more efficient. I was wondering if, as we need to use more electricity, because you're cutting back on your sales to lots of other places, the lighting you mentioned, you're cutting back on your sales. How about helping me out with a rebate or a dividend of some sort so that I'll buy an electric water heater or some other electric utility thing that's now currently being run by gas.
Yes.
I'm right there, I'm ready to do that, so the sooner you can do
Sure.
that.
I appreciate that.
So the
I appreciate
question is
that.
about alternatives of energy efficiency to say, well, you may use more electricity, but it's more efficient, and how do we handle that?
Yeah, so it's those kinds of technologies and how they're being used that we're going to explore. And Heather Sipkin in her area, as she's staffing up that group to focus in on that. One of the projects that we reviewed on Monday was how some utilities, now the smaller you are, you have greater flexibility in doing some things. The bigger you are, it's a little greater challenge, but I think we're up for that and how we may look at that. But they've used water heating as a way to shed load and gain load, right, during the day. Now, someone who has 5 kids during the day that does their laundry during the day, we may not be able to shed load during that day for that individual, but others we may during the day, where we don't want that electric water heater to come on during the peak time. So how do you do that? Same thing with electric vehicles. How do you manage that in the system? And so it's that kind of automation, that two-way communication, that digitalization that we're going to spend some time and energy on and understanding what that may look like. You know, we're currently in a project right now where we are replacing fiber optics across our whole service territory around substations because we're required to, because of some of the telephone communication folks are getting out of that kind of business. And so we've decided to kind of build our own network around that. And so we're looking at how do you leverage that network for a number of other different opportunities, which could be smart grid, automated services, two-way communication, whatever that may be. So I think you'll see those things pop up very clearly in some of the project and program development that Heather and her team are going to be focused in on. So you'll see those kinds of things show up.
For a long time, as long as solar and renewable energies have been discussed as an alternative to carbon sources of generation of electricity, it's been argued or suggested that it may not be feasible because of difficulties with transmission facilities. A big issue.
Yeah.
You generate the power, you still have to transfer it. So could you tell us a little bit about what's been happening in the transmission?
So okay, I'm sorry.
Transmission question, how do you make sure, regardless of where the energy comes from, that it gets where it needs to go?
I'm going to answer his question because, no, I'm just joking. No, you're fine. You're fine. I just got to give you a little hard time. So that's really important. That's one of the implications we want to take a look at. I'll use solar as an example. If you look at solar prices in northern Texas, northern New Mexico, southern Kansas, they will have a greater capacity factor by double digits of what you will see in Nebraska, maybe even southwest Nebraska. That capacity factor, depending on what it is, will drive what the cost is, right? The use of that. So in our service territory, you may get 25 to 35%, but in other parts of the Midwest that's tied into our transmission network that we're in, you may get something a little higher than that. You may get 30 to 35, maybe 40%. Well, that is a pretty significant difference in change in price because you're getting more kilowatt hours kilowatt hours from the same cost investment. What's important when you build that generation somewhere else, not within your footprint, you have to import that power in. And when you import that power in, you immediately increase risk of resiliency. through other things like tornadoes, planes, in Sarpedon. I see Councilman Don Preister here. 6 transmission lines were taken out on June 16th, 2017 by F1, F2 tornado that came through. If we did not have generation within our footprint, that could have been an interesting time for us. So part of the implications that we want to look at on whatever that goal is of 100% or no fossil fuel, what are the implications that we need to understand from a transmission grid to make sure that we maintain resiliency to get power in? Because a lot of that power may come from outside of our service territory in some cases. The other piece is that it may come from inside our service territory. And how do you manage that? They're finding difficulties right now in California by generating too much solar during certain times on distribution circuits that are creating operational issues there. So they're building kind of what we have on the transmission side to the distribution side. So they have great visual capability to be able to shut down rooftop generators so they don't overload systems on the distribution side. That's the implications we have to take a look at and be just clear about. It's not positioning it one way or another, it's just understanding what they are. So when you build generation outside, even the wind that we've built, you saw that in the map on the north central and northeast part of the state, there are resiliency issues. Now typically that wind doesn't show up on a peak day in Nebraska. You know, it really does well on the off peak, it really does well in the off season. But if you build solar in North Texas or New Mexico because of cost reasons or because of capability reasons, you may have to build additional transmission to improve that resiliency of getting that power in. Because you'll be relying on the grid for that reliability.
Is a lot of transmission facility having to be built in this area to take advantage of renewables?
There's a lot of the transmission being built in this area.
I would say not today. Not today. So there is, in the way that works today is that wind developer, essentially most of them have to interface with Nebraska Public Power District, and there may be capacity available on that line, but not during peak times. But that's not when they get the power. They get the power in off-peak times. So they look at all of that, and we have to get that cleared through the Southwest Power Pool on that interconnect. But if we had to bring thousands of megawatts in during peak times, it would change what that transmission grid would have to look like for that resiliency purpose. And that's when people say, you know, you guys, you know, you're not progressive enough to go to 100%. I just want to understand the implications. That's all I want to do, and then present whatever they are, and then the board has the opportunity to understand the implications and decide what they want to do. And then my job is to figure out with my teams the best way to execute that in the best manner. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
You bet. Yeah.
So in order for that transmission problem as well as your distributed generation issue you talked about in California, why don't you incentivize people to buy batteries and electric cars that you can have a two-way street from, so you can draw on it or deposit energy into, so that you can make your grid more stable. If you lose power and there's a lot of electric cars and batteries, they can provide power for that neighborhood or that area. Second, can you comment on that government report that was released on Thanksgiving talking about the economic implications from climate change? And I was in Las Vegas at an event, and the chief technology officer for Las Vegas City was there. He was talking about LED lights that are smart, that can dim, that has camera, that has
I'm going to act like I'm a press conference and you only get
I can answer these. Yeah, so let me take.
colors, and
Yeah.
they, you know, there's the guy, he was talking about, you know, in a park, they have these multiple color lights.
Let's answer the first two. And
Yeah, so, but I'm going to start with the third one, David, because I think that's really interesting. So the question is, how can you have the LED streetlights be smart? And so there is smart technology built into what we're buying in these networks today. Now, we're not activating them today because the jurisdictions aren't ready for them today. And our theory was we don't want to build in that smart technology now, have it not be essentially out of date in 7 years. And now the cities or counties or states are wanting to implement that, and now we got to change technology again. So, but we have the capability to do that, and they can use as
At least dim by themselves?
they could do whatever they want to do. It's a
So if there's
7.
nobody around, they can be at it.
They could if that's what you would want to do. That would be a city responsibility, and they could make that decision if they wanted to do that. But we're building that technology into the LED fixtures that we're going to be replacing the high pressure sodium and the mercury vapor that we have today. So that's one.
So the one in Las Vegas can direct police to.
No. We gotta-
There's a lot of technology around all of that.
Let's
So.
get to the other question.
So the other question is around incenting battery storage and/or EVs. Now, what we've done is a variety of research on EVs. We've added more EVs with some of the incentives. We've changed that trend line. Now, we typically only add about 100 a year in Nebraska, I think, or something like that. But we're seeing the increase with some of the work that we've done to increase that. We're a little early in that technology, but that is part of the work that, if you remember that kind of star where we looked at battery storage, we looked at a variety of different technologies. That was one of the things that we've looked at.
But GM just announced that they're shutting down 5 plants.
I know. Sure. They're
Please.
yeah. Okay.
Okay, I just want to point out, how many people purchased an EV under the OPPD program? So you see several of us in the room here. Okay, I
Yeah,
saw a
thank
hand
you.
in the back. Yes. Marianne.
This is one question.
All right, good.
As part of energy conservation, especially for new construction, do you include in the mix green roofs, also known as roof gardens, that also impacts stormwater management?
Sure. In our current energy efficiency or demand side management for new construction, the question is, do you look at rooftop gardens to assist with other energy conservation related activity? I know that some new construction, some commercial developers are looking at that as we speak. We looked at that in our Omaha center. We built it to LEED level capability, and so I know we look at that, and we're continuing to look at what we need to do inside. That's part of the change in SD7 is a couple things. One, to be very clear about what our emissions are, and present them publicly and what those are. Two is begin to talk about what we're doing inside the organization for increased efficiency and increased environmental stewardship. In our current new construction related work, we provide incentives for high efficiency, I think above 17 SEER air conditioners. Heather, someone keep me honest on this. Is it lower? Maybe 15? Yeah, maybe it's 15. So it's 15, yeah. So if it's over 15, then there's an incentive or a rebate that goes to that, because that's a great time to increase the efficiency. That typically is in the 13 or 14 today. And we'll look at those on an annual basis, and as 15 becomes common, we'll ratchet that up and increase that efficiency. And there's other kind of elements to our energy efficiency and our demand side management programs that we have as well that customers can take advantage of if they have interest in doing that.
Ken.
What's the status of your low-income energy efficiency programs, and do you have a multi-family program?
So the question is, do we have any energy efficiency programs? Are you guys texting back and forth? I know. No. Do you guys have any energy efficiency programs for multifamily, and what do you have for low income? Correct? And so I would say we do have energy efficiency programs and initiatives we have for low income, single family homeowners. For us, it's been this landlord market has been really interesting for us. As you well know, I know there's members here that are also part of OTOC and some of the things that you want to do, but that's an interesting market that we haven't been able to get a lot of leverage with, because you can't really do things with the renters. In some cases, you have to get the landlords engaged in that, and that sometimes can be difficult based on whatever their circumstances are. I will tell you there are some exceptional landlords out there that do really good things around energy efficiency and improved conditions for people, and they've utilized our programs, and obviously, you know, not all have done that today. So that's a nut we're trying to crack and figure out what's the right way to do that. So.
Don.
Thank you for being here.
You bet, Don.
Appreciate the movement forward on a lot of the renewables by OPPD. And in case OPPD didn't get my message, Bellevue would like to have community solar.
Understand.
My question
It's on camera.
My question is, the LED light conversion you mentioned was going to take 5 years. Is that because you're going to replace them as they burn out and it takes 5 years, that's about their lifespan? Or how is that unfolding?
Yeah, so the question is the 5-year term on the replacement of LED lights really a basis of when they will essentially need to be replaced anyway? And so here's the balance of that. When we presented this to the board, that was the intent. Because if we have to do this on the front end, there's a significant amount of salvage loss that we have to write off, right? So there's a significant negative impact that would have to roll back into the streetlight rates. And so we were sensitive of that, very sensitive. And so what we said is, let's look at a 5-year conversion program, but there are going to be times where if we do 4 on a string or 4 on a street and we know there's the 5th one there, we're just going to do the 5th one. And the 5th one might have been knocked down 2 years ago or might have been replaced 2 years ago. We'll just do it because we don't want that return trip, because that's also costly. So we're stepping through what that process is going to look like, and our team is then going to go back out to the government agencies and have that conversation about, you know, what does that look like and how can we do it in the best way within their jurisdictions. So that's the rationale around it.
Thank you.
And from a guy from Bellevue, thanks, Don, for being here.
1, 2,
So.
3. Yes, yeah.
Hey, thanks, David. Thanks for being here, Tim. So I'm interested in the slide where you show the cost of solar and wind per megawatt hour, and wondered if you could talk a little bit about the cost for running the coal plants and the gas plants.
Yeah.
And maybe even the nuclear plant that's not open anymore, just for us to get a better understanding
Yep.
of how it all compares.
So the question is, if you could give me a sense, go back to the wind and solar slide on cost and kind of compare to us where coal might be or fossil fuel might be and where nuclear was before we shut that down. And so I'm going to try to give you my best take on it, and I'll kind of point to you where it is on the map here, or on the slide.
Sorry, that's a lot of slides.
Yeah, that's fine. Did I talk that long? I must have. So an example. So if we were looking at Fort Calhoun Nuclear Station, that cost would have been about in this area. Right? It was in this area.
That includes all the costs.
That includes all the costs. That was must-run cost.
Before the problems.
But
That is before the problems, but it's
a lot of costs.
yeah. Well, that's an economy of scale related issue. Fort Calhoun was the smallest nuclear plant in the United States fleet of 104 nuclear plants, right? And so when you look at nuclear plant cost, you have about 700 people at a nuclear plant, regardless of whether it's 1,200 megawatts or whether it's 478 megawatts. Doesn't matter. Certainly there were some flood and some regulatory issues that impacted that, but even if you strip that out, those costs are significantly higher than the market price. Market price, you know, today was $31 or $32, let's say. But my guess is give this out once the cold snap kind of gets back to a normal winter, you'll see $12 or $13 prices and what that looks like. Coal is in the relatively low price, probably about half of this price right here. Right? About half, fully loaded. Part of the rationale is that there's typically for utilities a split between operating cost and fuel cost, and they're about 50-50. And because we're close to the Wyoming low sulfur mines, we get low transportation cost. right? So that's part of the, let's understand the implications and how can we time things appropriately as we kind of move to whatever that new energy marketplace looks like. So hopefully that answers your question on those two.
Methane, where it's at?
Methane is very similar to coal right now. I'll let somebody give me, we're within reason around that.
Yeah, particularly talking about landfill gas.
Yeah.
Yeah, so landfill gas that we get ends up being relatively cheap. I think under $10 a megawatt hour roughly.
Yeah.
But there's only so much of it.
Yeah.
It's limited, and we're maxing out the landfill right now.
Yeah, it's our highest capacity factor generation. So it's in the 99% range because we always have a generator that's either in maintenance and you can only use 4 generators based on the capacity. So.
Her question was just answered, so it's back there.
Okay. Unlike most people who I would guess in here, I'm actually very pro-nuclear.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very interested to see if you guys have any other plans with Fort Calhoun, for example, turning it over as a thorium cycle plant or redeploying it as a radiopharmaceutical plant in the 60 years you still are saddled with it.
Yeah, so I would, so the question is, do you plan on using Fort Calhoun as another site for some nuclear or radiological facility? I'll just use it like that. I would say that is not the intent today. What our board decided, not last month, the month before, I think November, I guess we're in November, huh? October, was that we were going to move to deconstruction. And so we'll begin to deconstruct that facility after all of the fuel that's currently in the spent fuel pool is moved to the dry cask storage, which has already been built. So that's done, that's been built. That was on time, on budget, and the team there has been doing just exceptional work around that. So about the middle of 2019, maybe April, May, June timeframe, we'll begin to move the fuel from the spent fuel pool into the dry cask storage. That'll take about a year or so to do. So by the end of 2020, there'll be no fuel in the plant, and we'll begin to deconstruct that plant. So we'll be deconstructing that plant, and it'll be, after that period of time, it'll be about 8 years for us to create that into a green space. And how we utilize that green space is not determined at this point in time. So we could use it for some other facility, some other activity. We could market it to some industrial customers that are to the north of there, or other opportunities with some of the buildings that we have there. We've pretty much vacated one of the buildings, so we may have the opportunity to use that for a number of things. Could be an innovation center, could be a technology center, could be whatever that may look like. So we haven't determined that disposal process, and that site could be used for a number of different things. Not necessarily intended for that today, but I don't know what it'll be 8 years from now.
Yes.
May have answered this, but I didn't hear it. Where do you see putting solar panels on roofs with storage beginning to be utilized to back up those, kind of cover those peak periods, really coming into play?
Yeah, so the question would be, do you see rooftop solar and batteries being integrated together and be used into the marketplace? So if I go, I'm going to go forward to this right here. This is what we looked at. We looked at what about solar PV and energy storage, and what does that look like? I would say we're early in the technology cost graph, but I believe we're going to get there. And those two things will be locked in together in some way. And whether that's in whether that's in wall construction or roof construction, or whether that's just part of another system that sits on the off side of your home that stores the power that isn't needed for your home, it could be that way. And we're going to see increased efficiencies in solar PV as well. But it's how you integrate that, and then how do you use the system. Again, as I said, in California and in other places of the world, they're having some operational difficulties very clearly. And so we're going to learn from that, and we have conversations with folks. As a matter of fact, I'll be with some of those CEOs on Monday next week, And that'll be one of my kind of conversations that we'll begin to have with them. What are they looking at? How are they looking at that? What are they doing to mitigate some of those issues? And right now, what's happening in California is that there's so much solar being generated at certain times during the day, there's negative prices in Arizona, which is really interesting. So they're paying Arizona to take the power. So Arizona's making money, taking power, because they're generating too much than they need for their system. So how that works, I mean, it's an interesting, so part of our thought process from a public power side is that, very similar on our community solar, is that there may be a time in the marketplace where, we give you the market value, but then the market value is actually higher than the cost of that solar, and you get the value and the benefit from that. So there is that capability of that to happen in that community solar initiative, and what does that look like as we think about some of the distribution strategies around energy generation. So we're a little bit early on that, but that'll be part of that conversation that I think we're going to be doing some research on over the next several years.
I'll ask one and then give it to you, because I kind of promised that I would ask this, and it's my letter to the editor too. The fixed rate goes to $30 a month next year in January. And there were a lot of people that testified that they thought it was unfair to people with solar, people that have low energy use, and that it was a reverse incentive because it got lower. We've also heard the word that it's revenue neutral. So can you explain how this happened?
I would love to. Thank you, David, for that. And if I could fact check and send in a reply to the editorial, I would. Because what David didn't talk about is that, there's a $5 increase to $30 on the customer charge, but there's a 22% reduction in the cost of energy in the volumetric side. Right? And so part of the rationale around that strategy was to match up the fixed cost, regardless of usage, from meters and service and poles and wires and substations that have to serve that customer regardless of whether it's 100 or 500 or 700 or whatever that may look like. What I would say is, and some agree with that and some don't agree with that, and I understand that you may have difference of opinions around that. I will tell you that the engagement that we had on that topic, either in the research that we did or in the stakeholder output that we did, the stakeholder process that we went through, really challenged us to think about how we were going to focus on low-income customers. And so along with those two items, for those low-income customers that qualify, that use less than 600 kilowatt hours per month, they'll get a $7.50 credit per month on their bill, right? So that's part of that customer incentive kind of piece that we heard very clearly about what are we going to do with the low income as we kind of transition the rate restructuring. We are now seeing things in the marketplace where folks are developing kind of low use rates. So it may not have as high as charge, but it's still trying to cover that fixed cost. Because if you don't cover that fixed cost, somebody's going to have to cover it. Someone's going to have to cover it. And the example that I would use is rooftop solar is a great example. Is that if I still have a meter and I still have a service line, I still have a transformer, I still have a substation, and if you have rooftop solar and you don't have any volumetric, and matter of fact, you may be selling back to us in some cases, and we net that out at the cost per kilowatt hour that we charge you, somebody else has to pick up that differential cost in the system when we do rates. And so we're very sensitive about that shift. Now, what also gets lost in the conversation very clearly is that there are low-income, low-use customers and low-income, high-use customers. And when you talk to the folks that we talk to at Department of Health and Human Services and other social agencies, these folks that are high-use and also low-income essentially spend more dollars per kind of their capita, per their economic dollars that they generate within their home. They saw reduction, as well as other high users did. Those that are about 1,000 really didn't see any change in their bill at all. So when we say it's revenue neutral, what we mean is this, is that if our revenue is $1.1 billion, and we're increasing the customer charge from 25 to 30 and reducing the volumetric charge by 22%, we're not asking for any more revenue from our customer owners, right? So otherwise what we would do is, let's say if we were going to do a 5% rate increase at $1 billion, we would be asking for, about $50 million of costs that we're asking to have recovered. So.
Did you still, or did I ask your question? Or?
You did.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, was that it? Okay.
I'll just say one line that they edited out of my letter to the editor.
Oh.
And that is, Coca-Cola says, we're not going to raise the price of Coca-Cola. Oh, but by the way, shipping and the container is going to cost 300% more. So you don't think usually of all of those costs. You say, what do I pay? What is my payment? So I have 1, 2, 3.
Okay, 1. Well, what you talk about being neutral, revenue neutral, sounds fine from your end. But what hurts is the small user. When you add all these costs in, he's paying about 50 cents a kW, where maybe the big user is paying 20 cents a kW. So you're hurting the small user. And who is the small user?
Yeah.
Both ends of the life spectrum. A family starting out, and most of us being elderly. So you're whacking it to both ends.
Sure.
And so why don't you put everything in the kW cost, and that way it'll be spread by user usage.
Where were you regulating this? Yeah, I understand. I mean, we've had this internal conversation around this and external conversation as well. The intent is not to harm anybody. The intent is try to match up the fixed cost with the revenue stream as well, with the variable cost. And whenever you make that shift, it's someone gets impacted in that. I get that. I completely understand that. There may be a time where it was kind of interesting. In some of the focus groups that I went to, someone said, "Why don't you just charge everybody $100 and then you don't have to worry about it?" Well, that's not the right solution either for a small use customer either.
Fixed costs. A lot of the inner city people are maybe 50, 60 feet from your next door neighbor, where you get Western Omaha and Outreach, you got half mile to 20 miles. Same cost. Same fixed cost.
No, I understand that, and that's part of the discussion. No, I do. I really do. I tell you, we had this conversation pretty deeply around this, and I understand your position. I really do. I think what we're trying to do is figure out how do you transition into that. And we're not in a position today to do what we do with commercial customers, which is to charge you a demand for whatever that peak demand is on that given day or hour, that we charge you for that peak demand, and then that kilowatt hour cost, that volumetric cost, more matches the cost of that energy, whatever that energy may be, during that hour in that day, during that time, during that day. And we're not there yet, but that could be a transition later. But I will tell you, any time you do that, somebody gets impacted. That's why our team, based on the feedback that we heard from you and others like you, very clearly began to develop, how do we transition that? How do we provide that customer incentive to support that person that's in that low income category and needs that assistance?
How did your ancestors do that years ago? It was all in the KW.
We're moving on to the next one. Next time I'll have to have a debate, but this is not a debate.
I think we did that in the church several years ago, if I'm not mistaken. So, hi Kay, how are you?
CFO Edward Easterland told me when we were discussing the fixed fee back around the time we were in the church years ago, that this was going to be a trend coming across the entire country, that fixed fees were going up for everyone. And when you look at comparable cities in the Midwest, Now, the average fee for residential is $12. Next year, OPPD is going to be at $30.
Sure.
Which is between 2 and 3 times the fixed fee in comparable cities. So I would like to encourage you to reconsider this policy, look at what's going on in Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, South Dakota, and think about whether this still makes sense for your utility.
I would say we have seen it in other jurisdictions, okay? We have. And
I've seen it in Nebraska, but in other surrounding states for comparable cities.
I think you will see it.
Question, are you going to reconsider the fixed rates?
I think we always have the opportunity to relook at rates and whatever that looks like. Again, let's understand the implications to that. So if, now I know one person that will be, on our board in another month or so may have a different perspective on this, but let's say we did have a solar rate. Does that feel right, where the solar customer would have to pick up that fixed cost? And that's what we saw in Arizona, that's what we saw in other parts of the United States around that solar piece where they may not be covering their fixed cost. And that was the concern, to be very honest with you, as we saw and heard very clearly from solar folks about kind of what their intent is. And so we were trying to at least transform into something that we thought we could try to collect fixed costs from those that don't pay their fully allocated fixed costs today. Now, we didn't necessarily want to go down that path either. And so how do you transition that across all customers? And I would say anytime you begin to do that, someone is going to get impacted in that in some way. House, a business, whatever that may look like. And so it is something that we spend a lot of time on. I know people don't think we care about that, and I will tell you, then you don't know us very well in what we do inside our organization on those kinds of issues. It was very difficult for us to do that. So anyway.
So he did ask us a question. The question was, would that be fair? Yes.
And you don't even need to answer that today. It's more of a rhetorical question. That is the conversation that is interesting, because we do that with industrial customers that have their own peaking generation. It's called a standby charge, and that if they utilize that, we charge them that standby peak rate, because we do that. And we didn't think we were in a position, and we didn't think we were ready for that. But as we begin to kind of digitize our distribution system, we may have the capability to be far more clear about that. And I know our rates folks and our finance folks, Edward's replacement, Javier Fernandez, is really, they're redoing our cost of service clarity around that. And so my guess is that will be a conversation that will come up with our new board over the next years or so.
So I have my question, then I'll kind of explain it with an example. With this change in the service fee, will that also look at from a change in the net metering rate? My example would be, so if I put a rooftop solar system on my house, I get it. Even if I can produce my electricity, I still got to pay you guys for a service line because I want power when my rooftop's not supplying. But if we were trying to line up the service fee for fixed costs so that the volumetric fee is more in line with the usage, right now my understanding is I'm going to get about, if I give you extra energy, this extra energy I produce, I'm only going to get that about half the rate is what I'm paying you for what comes my way.
Yeah.
Would that?
So the question here is on, as you begin to think about that going to 30% and the volumetric goes down to 22%, the way we work on our current net metering is that anything customers use from their renewable resource today, we don't charge you anything for, right? And so you pay the $30, and then if your system doesn't generate all of your energy, then you pay us that incremental difference. If you charge, if you generate more energy than your house uses in a month, then we charge you a kind of a buyback fee that is equal to, or close to equal to, actually it's higher than our average cost of generation.
Pay, not charge.
pay the person that has to.
Yeah, did I say charge? Thanks, Alan. Yeah. So we would pay you that differential. Now that's, I don't know, 2.2 cents, 3 cents, 5 cents.
2.4.
Thank you very much. So Colton's here. He's the statistician. 2.4. And so the answer is that piece that you will get back in the net metering will be less because that volumetric piece will be less. But that also includes still fixed costs that isn't being recovered. And so it's not a perfect system, I can assure you that. But it wasn't perfect before. And we're trying to figure out how we get it to match up with fixed cost and variable costs. So we get to a point where we don't really care what people do, right? So if I could take all fixed costs and put it on a house or a business or a building, I may incent certain things for generation that allows me the flexibility to do that because then I know I have my fixed costs covered. It's one of those interesting phenomenons that we're going to spend a lot of time on because part of the strategy is how do you do this on the distribution side, not just the utility grade side, but on the distribution side of the business. And I would say no one does it perfect yet, and I'm not sure we're ever going to get to perfect. So our perspective is, hey, let's don't worry about perfection. Let's get to excellence, and then we'll kind of refine it as we need to refine it. So that's the work that we're going to spend time and energy on.
And we're going to have 2 more questions. These are 2 repeat questioners.
Well, I'll just, before I moved to Omaha, I was the mayor of a small city in Kentucky, and we operated our water plant, our sewer plant, and purchased electricity, wholesale electricity. And so I became very intimately familiar with the regulatory horizon that you guys are doing, and that's the way the regulators are now approaching it. As the fixed costs go with these, of the operations go with these, for every drop, for every meter, for whatever it is, and that's the way the regulatory commissions are doing it now. So I think it's really out of your control as much as anything.
Well, it is. What's unique in Nebraska here is that we have 8 board members that get the opportunity to make those decisions. And so I know there's been there's conversations that we've had with the board about coming back on a number of different rate items and looking at it. But we want to get our kind of a lot of clarity on our cost of service study where we can get farther and cleaner into what that may look like. So.
Our exposure was that we were seeing the regulators coming at us saying, no, these are the fixed costs you've got covered.
Yeah.
Last question before, and Kim said he was willing to stay here, but he said the electricity will go off at 9.
Well, there you go. And it's not because of OPPD.
That reminds me of the time I had a meeting with you and I went to your offices and the electricity went out. But that's the issue.
That was to get you to leave, Ken. I'm just joking.
Yeah, I was trying to give it the environmentalists. Well, I guess just quickly, I wanted to say, give it a little plug for public power and just say the fact that you are here tonight and the fact that the changes in renewable energy that have happened in the last 8 years, that is a testament to public power and responsiveness to the fact that people like David have been showing up month after month and speaking and a lot of folks in this room have been showing up at meetings and saying, John Pollock, giving the weather report every month, and Mark, and so I guess I just wanted to give a plug for public power and for
thanks.
public participation.
I appreciate that as well.
Now, I do have a question. Are you aware of the LES tiered fixed cost rate range where they have, right, well, currently it's $15 a month for a low user, I believe I fall in that category, and then it goes up to $33.75 to a higher user. Just saying there are other models out there.
Absolutely.
And maybe what it can be done. And I'm not saying this is perfect. There's some things I'd like to see changed about this, but
sure.
But in any event, there are some other models.
There's no doubt. Our clarity on the cost of service couldn't get to where they got to. And my guess is they've learned from us on what they need to do and how they need to structure that. This is going to be it's going to be the same issue regardless of how you change that. Someone is going to be impacted by that one way or another on LES. And so our deal is how do you do it in the fairest in the fairest way. And that's what we try to share with our board. Here is what we believe is the fairest and the most equitable way to kind of do this in that way. And I get the opportunity to sit with the board, and I get the opportunity to be with you and handle the criticism around it or the concern around it, and I get that, and that's my role, and that's why I'm here today. So, very good, thanks.
And on who's the fairest of them all. Thank you all for coming. Thanks to Nebraska for Solar. Thanks to Green Bellevue, the Sierra Club. Thanks to all the OPPD, and of course especially to Tim Burke. He did say he could hang around for a little bit. If you didn't get to ask a question, or you want to ask one, you're too shy to do it, this is your opportunity. So thanks to everyone. Appreciate it.
Good to see you, my friend.